Hello and welcome back to Keyforge Concepts. In the last video, we talked about the first turn in Keyforge, why it's so important, and specific strategies to execute to set ourselves up for success. In this video, we're finally going to be taking a look at specific cards, what makes them great first turn plays, and where they fall within our first turn success criteria. Before we take a look at things, let's quickly review our 4 strategies for a successful first turn. I'm going to be referencing these from my previous video on first turn play strategy. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you do. It's highly relevant to this video and goes more in depth about the mindset and thought process behind the first turn. I'll include a card to take you to the video in the top corner here, as well as a link in the description if you're interested. Now, as mentioned in the last video, our 4 first turn success strategies are playing many cards from a house, playing a threat, playing a card with immediate gain, and playing cards that will cycle your deck faster. Playing many cards from a house doesn't really apply to this video, since it has to do more with the house composition of your starting hand, so we won't be talking about it here. That leaves us with 3 categories that our cards will fall under. Let's start by talking about threats, which are cards that can generate significant value if not removed from the board. I categorize this into 3 main types of threats, which are cards with constant or passive effects, cards that actively threaten strong abilities usually attached to reap, fight, or action, and cards that threaten removal. Let's take a look first at cards with constant effects. Ember Imp can be an incredibly punishing first turn play, especially if your opponent cannot deal with it immediately. Being limited to only 2 cards played a turn severely limits a player's ability to gain board control, cycle through their deck, and make efficient plays. If you are able to keep Ember Imp alive and protect it, perhaps by putting a taunt creature beside it, most players would struggle to take it out by only playing 2 cards on their turn. It is the pinnacle of turn disruption. That being said, it is only 2 power and non-elusive, so it will die to the majority of removal actions, as well as most creatures already on board, which makes it much more impactful as a first turn play. Taliga is a really fun card to have, especially if you're going first. Special shout out to the majority of the Untamed Witches, a lot of which are great first turn plays. The saying in Keyforge is burn the witch when it comes to these cards, because they can all turn into problems if they're left on board. Back to Taliga though, picture this. You start the game and your opponent is super excited. They just drew into 5 creatures of the same house. They're going to drop them all, take board control, take over the momentum of the game, and then they see you drop Taliga turn 1. Now your opponent has a lot of questions to ask themselves. Is it worth giving you 5 amber to have that amazing start they wanted? Do they play only 1 creature to minimize your gain and hope that they can fight and remove Taliga next turn and then continue playing out their hand? Maybe they only play 2 or 3 of their more impactful creatures as a happy medium. But what about the other creatures they have in hand? Do they discard those in hopes of better draws? Or do they hold on to them and then almost force themselves to call the same house again next turn? There is so much room for error when playing around this card, and forcing your opponent to make difficult decisions is great for our chances. Now, a card like Customs Office is definitely much more situational, but can be very oppressive against certain decks. If I'm looking at my opponent's list and I see 4, 5, 6 artifacts there, putting this down first turn can really mess with my opponent's plans, especially since at the beginning of the game, there's not a lot of amber in people's pools. The keyword in this card is that they must pay you 1 amber in order to play their artifact. So if they can't pay, they can't play. This means that they also need at least 1 amber in their pool to play an artifact. Even if the artifact itself has an amber pip on it, they can't play the artifact, gain the amber, and then just give you that amber, because they need to have paid you to even play the artifact in the first place. There are many decks out there with very few or even no artifacts, but this card can really shine in certain matchups. Let's move on now to cards that threaten strong abilities. These do not have any effect the turn that they are played, so when you play a card like this, you ideally want to be able to follow up with the same house again next turn to make use of their ability. John Smith is a card a lot of people like to see in their Mars lists. Having him on board allows him to ready and use friendly Mars creatures the turn they come into play, or get multiple uses out of the same Mars creature already in play. The best part is that John Smith himself synergizes greatly with the multiple cards that ready creatures in Mars. Instead of readying the creature you want to use, you can ready John Smith, reap for an extra amber, and then ready and use another creature. Really great value for decks with strong Mars creatures. Quant is one of many valuable Logos creatures in Worlds Collide. Being able to house cheat is amazing, with the added benefit of getting more cards out of your hand. Quant is often compared to Wormhole Technician, due to having the same power and similar cycle-related reap effects. In my opinion, Wormhole Technician is the safer choice of the two, since you're guaranteed at least an archive or a card played. However, I think Quant has the higher overall potential due to its house cheating, as well as the non-random nature of its ability. Finchcloak is a card I really like and an interesting first turn play. In general, creatures that threaten steal aren't always the best first turn plays, because even though stealing is such an incredibly powerful mechanic, at the beginning of the game there simply isn't much amber to work with, which can reduce their overall effectiveness. Depending on the deck, players can play around stealing early game by building their board and not gaining amber for you to steal in the first place. Finchcloak works around this problem by always giving you an extra amber on fight or reap, whether she can steal or not. Gaining 2 amber on reap with the potential to steal is too powerful to be ignored. Just make sure you weigh the risk-reward of giving your opponent amber themselves. Philophosaurus is one of my favorite cards in Worlds Collide. Remember the 3 keywords that help cycle your deck? Those would be draw, archive, and discard. This creature does all 3 of them at the same time. Reaping with Philophosaurus even once or twice greatly accelerates and streamlines your deck, and being able to choose which card goes where gives you great flexibility with how you plan your future turns. It also has a respectable 4 power, so it's fairly resistant to most damage and removal actions. If you're able to further protect this card through the multiple warding and taunt options in Saurian at the moment, this card can get really out of hand. Finally, let's take a look at cards that are removal threats. Most cards with high power can be considered removal threats, and there's so many that I'm not going to list them all here. I really like Shorty as a removal threat because Assault 4 makes most of his fights pretty safe. If you have a 4 power or less creature, it doesn't matter if they have elusive, they're gonna die. It also gets around warded creatures, since the Assault pops the ward first, after which he deals his regular combat damage. Assault 4 also lets him punch up, allowing him to trade with creatures up to 8 power, which is an added plus. Overall, a flexible fighter and one of the better Brobnar cards in Worlds Collide. Collector Worm is an interesting card because not only does it remove creatures, but it also denies your opponent from getting them back. Being able to abduct your opponent's creatures into your archives is not only thematically appropriate in Mars, but it also forces your opponent to really think about how important their creatures are to them, since it's not likely they're going to be getting them back once they're in your archives. The 5 armor also gives it a lot of survivability, which makes it easier to get multiple fights off without sustaining damage. Uxlik's Zookeeper has the same effect, but attached to a reap, which I think is strictly better. There's no creature too powerful for you to archive, you don't have to worry about not being able to target the creature you want because of taunt, and you're gaining an amber from reaping, which is a nice bonus. The next category here is cards that provide immediate gain when they are played. These cards don't really represent a threat after they are played, and thus there's no real urgency for your opponent to take them off board. Flaxia would be the best example of this. If you're going first, her effect is guaranteed, and you only need one other untamed creature in hand to make it work going second. Easy to get off, 2 amber first turn is nice, and you have a nice 4 power body to use to trade or reap on future turns. Treasure Map is one of the biggest amber gains from a single card in Keyforge. Getting 2/3 of a key during a turn when you can only play 1 card anyways is huge. Unfortunately, it's not a great play if you're going second, because you generally want to be playing more cards to generate momentum. Eureka is another fantastic play, one of the best first turns in the game in my opinion. Even though it's 1 less amber than Treasure Map, 3 amber off 1 card is still incredible. The really special thing about this card is the ability to archive 2 cards from your hand. Putting 2 cards into your archives, even if they're random, means that you're freeing up 2 extra spaces of draw space in your hand. In an ideal scenario, you would play Eureka, archive 2 non-Logos cards since you weren't going to use them that play anyways, and continue to play out your Logos turn, ending your turn with a mostly depleted hand and having a satisfying draw back up to 6. Even if you do end up archiving Logos cards and end up with an awkward turn, you're still getting a half key's worth of amber and archiving cards to free up space in your hand for future draws. This brings us to our final category, which are cards that cycle your deck faster. Lay of the Land is a nice amber pip and draw, with the added effect of scouting ahead in your deck and choosing which card to draw, which is very powerful and somewhat negates the random nature of drawing in general. Tau Tau Vapors allows you to draw 2 cards and archive any 1 card from your hand, at the cost of having no amber pip attached. Any draw cards I would prefer if I was going second, since generally you want to be playing the card that you draw during your turn. Hidden Stash and Lab Work free up 2 spaces in your hand, and allow you to archive a strong card for later. Information Officer Gray, with the caveat of the card you archive not being in star lines, offers a solid 4-power body and the annoying ability to repeat its effect on both Fight and Reap on future turns. Sloppy Lab Work, in my opinion, is a better first turn play than Lab Work or Hidden Stash, since you're opening up 3 extra draw slots instead of just 2. The discard will rarely come into play, since there is usually 1 card in your hand that you could probably do without. Captain Val Jericho is an amazing card, and probably the strongest of the cards that allow you to house cheat. To start, 5 power 1 armor is pretty resilient. Your opponent will most likely need to specifically dedicate resources to take her off the field. Of course, what makes her ridiculous is her ability to let you house cheat every turn she's on board, as long as she's in the middle of your battle line. Her ability is actually very flexible compared to the other Worlds Collide leaders who need to end their turn at the center of the battle line, because she only needs to be in the center when you play that out-of-house card. You can use her ability if she starts her turn in the center, or manipulate your line as necessary to get her to the center, use her ability, and then potentially move her off center if you need to. Her flexibility, staying power, and the ability to recur her effect every turn irrelevant of what house you're in makes her a standout of cards that house cheat. Since having only 1 creature in your battle line puts them in the center of your battle line automatically, she's also a card that can break the first turn play limit. As of Worlds Collide, cards that can break the first turn play limit are Captain Val Jericho, Comm Officer Kirby, Helper Bot, and Phase Shift. I will also give mention to both Wild Wormhole and to Merkins, who allow you to resolve their effects and play an additional card from the top of your deck or your opponent's deck respectively. It's not quite the same due to their random nature, but you are still playing 2 cards during the first turn. I believe this is all the cards that allow you to break the first turn play limit. If I've missed any, let me know. As we've gone through these cards, you may have come to notice some overlap between our success criteria. And it's true, there are cards that can be classified under multiple of our 3 categories, which makes them that much more valuable and effective as first turn plays. As an example, I would like to highlight a card that is agreed to be one of the very best first turn plays in the game, Mother. We can also discuss 2 very similar cards released in Worlds Collide, which would be Daughter and the Logos leader Zenzi Zenzi Zenzik. Right off the bat, increasing your hand size is a very powerful ability. Zenzi's is a little bit more difficult to pull off and requires active battle line management to maintain, but gaining 2 extra cards at the end of your turn is an absolutely massive payoff. It's a constant threat since it's a passive ability, which puts pressure on your opponent to remove Mother before your card advantage gets out of control. As well, since you benefit from this the turn you play it, I also consider this a card with immediate gain. More cards in your hand means that you're drawing extra cards you wouldn't have otherwise, which increases the speed that you're cycling through your deck and the overall efficiency of your deck. Now, at 2 power, Daughter doesn't have much staying power in general, even with Elusive, but Mother and Zenzi at 5 power and 4 power 2 armor respectively both actually represent a removal threat to your opponent. During a Logos turn, you could easily run a Mother or a Zenzi into a weaker creature and still live to continue benefiting from its effect. The potential value gained from this card is absolutely tremendous, especially at the beginning of the game where your opponent might not have the creatures or actions to throw at a resilient threat like this. Any of these three cards are amazing first turn plays against most decks out there, and it's not just these cards that check off multiple boxes. Philophosaurus, for example, is a reap threat, and his ability does a great job of cycling through cards faster. Eureka instantly gains you 3 amber, as well as archiving 2 cards, which again cycles through decks faster. Information Officer Gray is able to archive a card immediately, but his ability to threaten it every Star Alliance turn makes him a threatening card to leave down. And Val Jericho does allow you to house cheat cards, but it's also a constant ability that needs to be dealt with. These are only a handful of cards that make effective first turn plays. There was no way I could get around to all of them in a reasonable amount of time. Which ones are your favorite? Which ones did I miss out on? Which ones are most effective for you? Let me know in the comment section below. I still have a few things I want to talk about regarding the first turn, so join me next time when I will discuss mulligans, where we can look at the numbers and hopefully dispel some negative stigma around taking mulligans. For now, thank you so much for watching. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.